I can tell you that when the Honeybee Health Coalition started, the goal 10 years ago was to minimize overwintering losses down below 15%. And at the 10-year anniversary, we had a 60% winter mortality rate. So we can see where things are going. In the last 3 years, we've had the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, and we've gone from the beekeeping industry has gone from $0 from the federal government to this year over 100 million. Next year, probably 250 million. Keeps going up, and it will keep going up. When the Tropi mite comes, I think we're going to have ripple effects on our economy, estimated between at a high end, at the highest end, between 13 and 18 billion dollars a year of agricultural related losses due to that mite. Okay, if we're talking that much money, what could we do for less than that much money that might assist in our long-term goal of providing affordable food to our population? And I think that's the concept, is affordable food to our population, sustainable, affordable food that's healthy.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is PolliNation, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Well, Harry, we are back with the commercial beekeeping segment. Who do we have this week?
This week, I am so proud and happy to introduce Ryan Lieuallen of Sweet Bee Honey Company out of Milton-Freewater, Oregon. Him and his wife Stacy and their two wonderful kids are continuing a 5-generation beekeeping heritage and selling farm direct honey and pollinating crops all the way from the Mexican border all the way to the Canadian border. And very, very inspirational people carrying themes that are very important to the future of our industry as well as society. So I think everybody's going to really enjoy listening to this episode.
I really love the far-sighted long view that Ryan takes. And maybe that comes from being part of an operation, a beekeeping legacy that goes back a few generations. But I thought that was amazing, just his, and not only just ideas, but real practical things he's doing on the ground right now, like a nonprofit and creating pasture that, it's really going to be amazing to our listeners.
The type of thinking and planning that Ryan projects is just exactly what I think we need a lot more of. And I'm just really excited for everyone to get to hear his plans for the future.
Well, without further ado, let's head over to Milton-Freewater to talk with Ryan Lieuallen from Sweet Bee Honey Company this week on PolliNation.
Ryan, it's so great to have you on PolliNation. I'm very excited to catch up with you after a few years and seeing all of the great things going on up in your operation in Milton-Freewater, Sweet Bee Honey Company, and some exciting new things that you and your lovely wife Stacy have put together and taken off and run with, continuing a 5-generation beekeeping operation. That's really impressive. We really love to see family operations.
Yeah, thanks, Harry.
So what is going on right now at Sweet Bee Honey Company?
Well, it's pretty quiet. Pretty quiet. We're in December. We're working right now downstairs, repairing equipment. We're bringing all of our dead out equipment, nuke boxes in, scraping, cleaning comb, cleaning boxes, sanding boxes, repainting them, pulling cleats that are rotten, replacing, throwing away, burning. And we're just actually getting into where we're going to take a break here at probably the next 10 days. We're freighting our bees to California right now, trying to beat the snowy weather that's going to approach around the holiday season. So that, and we're just prepping for the spring. So we're looking at our finances, pre-ordering medications, attending beekeeping conferences. We just got back from the American Honey Producers in Tampa, and there's another one coming up in Alabama soon.
So what are you, after our tumultuous winter last year, what are you hearing about? Are you hearing confidence in our industry as far as getting back on our feet? Some of the people had a tragic winter last year. What are you hearing there?
A mixed bag. So last year we heard early some losses that were occurring. This year I hear early that there was a high mite load in the summer, but losses thus far have not been reported to be high overall. However, quality of hives will probably be lower if they carried larger mite loads in the summer. And we'll have to see. The data from the tech companies is not reliable right now, so they didn't have any input at the meeting. And some of the larger bee operations have transitioned, consolidated, and sold. So there could be something to watch there. Oftentimes there's some speed bumps when things get traded around. But I would project a better year.
Well, we're certainly about ready for one, I would say. I understood that the almonds were short about 800,000 hives this last year.
Yeah.
That's breathtaking.
So one of the things, we were down in Denver a month ago at the Honeybee Health Coalition conference, and we had some almond board representatives there. They were predicting the largest crop in record, the USDA was, and they were as well. And that's got shifted. It's still the largest crop, perhaps, maybe, but there was far more bearing acres this year, and so yield per acre is definitely down, which is reflective of the lack of pollination, which is what we were worried about actually, because if we were missing that many hives in the almonds, we would expect the yield per acre to be dropped. And if in fact it was not dropped, then we could potentially be overstocking the acreage with bees. And if that was the case, that could have a ripple effect on the industry. But all is well or poor in terms of almond crop. And so I think we're in line this year as beekeepers to ask for a price increase or the money up front. If you're going to give a discount, I think we're in a position of strength.
So I was noticing that especially from a couple of years ago, the almond prices are looking pretty healthy. They were down to like $1 something here just not too long ago.
Yeah, a lot of that, almonds are a world traded commodity, so politics are involved a lot. But yes,
Sure.
they, I think, have been getting some help both from our government subsidizing them and the price of the nuts and the purchasing increasing. So that's good because we've had some rough years post COVID. I know, generally speaking, from the growers that we deal with, they're still very protective of their finances. I think that they struggled. A lot of people went from maybe self-financing themselves for decades to maybe having to take operating loans these last couple years. And so they're transitioning hopefully out of that, but it's too early to tell, what the next few years are going to look like.
Well, misery loves company. I'm glad we're not the only ones that take a beating every year. So you brought up mites, and I see that, oh God, what is it called? One of our registered products now has made general registration. Anyway, what are you hearing at the meetings you attended on new Varroa strategies?
So there's an RNAi Varroa treatment that's been in development for over 10 years. It's traded hands. I remember when the Honeybee Health Coalition, the very first meeting I went to in the Willamette Valley, where we visited George Hansen's facility, I learned about this RNAi product, I should say. It is now registered for use federally as the name of it's called NOROA,
Varroa.
NOROA. However, availability is very difficult. Each state now has to register it. It's I believe it just got registered in California on Friday or Thursday of last week. But you need, I don't know if it's an operator's license or a registration with the state of California to purchase it and use it. So that's going to basically make it very difficult for beekeepers there to use it and apply it. The other problem with that product is the treatments are $22 right now, and you need 4 of those for one treatment. So it's an $88 just in the treatment cost for Varroa protection, which is not in the wheelhouse for commercial beekeepers. So
No.
On that front, though, we are attempting to work out some details potentially with an area-wide treatment program. And we're going to do a pilot program this fall, this spring in California, and potentially using some of these new products and see which products maybe have the greatest effect when we apply them at the beginning of the year when the bees are in the almonds, pre-almonds, post-almonds, and then maybe in a year or two, if we can accumulate some data on this, we can get some pricing assistance from the government on some of these more expensive products.
That's great. Well, it was Amaflex is another newer one. Are you familiar? You're really more than familiar with that, I'm sure. It's a flash treatment of,
Amatraz.
thank you, Adoni, of Amatraz. And it was, one needed an operator's license for that, and that has now changed. It has made general registration in Oregon. So that's going to be really exciting. But the testing shall begin.
Yeah, I mean, just like with any pest, I think we have to have a varied approach to the medicines we're using to control them. So, kind of an integrated pest management system. With that said, a lot of the chatter at the bee meetings is also about a new problem, a new pest, the Tropi mite, which is now making its way across Eastern Europe. So we can kind of watch the data coming out of Western Europe to see how fast it's going to spread. It's currently in Georgia, but how fast it's going to spread west. Because really, it's not a matter if we get it, it's when. That particular pest does respond well to formic acid, and it doesn't do well in overwintering environments where the bees go broodless. But with that said, it's going to be a problem for our future for sure.
Ryan, I want to just we bring things back. We are now in December. Can you walk us through how your system for getting bees ready for shipment, I guess, in December, beating out the winter storms, but making sure that things are ready and prepared and to move down. Can you walk us through your process?
Well, it's a lot of hope, Andoni. I'll tell you, by this point in time, it's what we've done for the prior 10 months that really matters. In terms of actual preparation now, we are literally just loading trucks, driving them across the scale, and dropping them off in holding yards throughout different parts of California, depending on many factors. Where these bees spent the majority of the year prior to this point, the size of the colony as measured in the month of November, and then where they're needed for pollination, in the future. And so we are dropping bees down near the border in Mexico, in the Imperial Valley. Our smaller hives, our nukes go down there. And then up in the central part of California, east of San Francisco, we're dropping bees off, which is in the area where we do most of our almond pollination. And then some of the bees stay here until January, and then they get shipped down after Christmas when all of our crew goes down there. Yeah, but as far as pre-prepping from this point, we watch the weather over here. So we start to get cold around the 20th of October. So we try to get most of our feeding done prior to the Oregon State Beekeeping Conference, which is at the end of October. Now, in the last decade, I'd say almost half of the years, we're feeding another round in November because we're just getting warm temperatures. It's right now, outside it's 50 degrees, and yesterday it was almost 60, and we're into the first week, past the first week of December. So, the changing environment changes what we do, but definitely keeping the weight right in the hives. we need to focus on that early because they do not take they're unable to evaporate the syrup properly after mid-October. And what you can run into some issues with mold. Sometimes it can cause more damage than help. And so if they're too light and they need feed, again, we have to move them south and we have to find an appropriate climate where we can continue the feeding regimen.
When you're going through in October before feeding, I imagine you're culling colonies out at that point. And so the colonies that are getting on trucks have already been met a minimum threshold of size, and um, you're kind of taking your dead outs as early as possible, I imagine.
Yeah, so we start Varroa treatment in August and we hopefully finish in September. Sometimes we'll get little mite bombs, but we try to move our entire operation away from other beekeepers. So we have property and farms and we try to get them to where they're with further than 3 miles from another bee yard. And then when we do our Varroa treatment, it's much more lasting and effective. This won't work for everyone, of course, but that is one of our secrets to success. And then we're checking for weight and we're grading the hives. We grade the hives twice. So we grade them at the last Varroa treatment. We're treating in the middle of the two deeps. And so we tip up the hive, we count the frames on the bottom board, on the bottom of the bottom deep that are covered with bees. And then we count also in the center and we write that number on the lid. So it could be 6 frames of bees or 14 frames of bees. Then once it cools down in October and the robbing stops, we aggregate the small hives. So say anything less than 5 frames, we'll aggregate onto pallets. And then those will get shipped south early in October. And they'll just start to brood up down there, and we'll feed them pollen every few weeks, pollen patties and supplements. Syrup is needed. Then the rest of the bees, they get marked if they're underweight, significantly light or otherwise. And we'll be feeding all of the bees a few rounds of syrup and then go back and feed those ones that are marked until they're heavy. If they will not gain weight, and some hives just keep brooding up as you feed them, then depending on how many there are from year to year, we'll move them south and keep feeding, or we'll just destroy those colonies because they're costing us too much money to maintain.
Can we just back things up one more step? Recently, I talked to you a couple of years ago about creating forage habitat for your bees, some pasture for your bees, and I imagine this is for after you're done in almonds and other pollinations, the colonies are coming back in there, either making a honey crop or at least getting a pollen flow before winter. How are your bees being fed in sort of the latter summer months, and what have you done to try and address that with creating pasture?
Yeah, so we're like you mentioned, 5 generations of beekeeping. We started great grandfather Ransom on the wall over here. He started in the 1860s when he came over to America, and we've slowly kind of progressed through this migratory beekeeping pioneering that's occurred in the United States. When my grandfather, for example, started in North Hollywood, there was one blinking light, and most of that area was covered in orange groves. And they made an orange crop, and then they moved up to sage country. They had a big farm near the coast. And then a lot of those orange groves were taken out, removed, and replaced by housing, which is the typical kind of trend that we've seen in the last 100 years. So when I got into the beekeeping business, I was in the Willamette Valley, which is where my grandfather retired. His last operation was in the Midwest, and he sold it to his employees. So he kind of helped integrate me into new age beekeeping because when he retired, it was the year I was born. It was in the 80s. Varroa mite had just arrived, but he had never had to deal with it. I mean, they had so many bees during his time that they even talk about fumigating them in the winter because they had too many. They brought them down to Texas, made their splits and singles, brought them back up to make the honey crops in the Midwest, and that was kind of their migration path. For us, though, when I got into it, we had Varroa mites and almond pollination, and we also didn't have great honey territory in the Willamette Valley. And so my progression through beekeeping started there, and eventually facilitated its way towards kind of pollinator habitat. I realized that there was two sides of this industry. There was the service side to pollinate crops, and then there was the honey production side, which was to make honey. And they're hand in hand because the health of the hive was greatest when you had them in a high nutrition area. So where they were able to produce honey and gain pollen, and that tended to be away from agriculture and away from urban structures. So we decided back, oh, I think it was in 2014, so about 10 or 12 years ago, that we would really like to get an operation in Montana where they had registered territory where you could stay away from other beekeepers and where perhaps the prairie lands provided more nutrition. So we bought an operation over there and we started producing large quantities of honey, but we kept our Oregon operation going and got more involved in the beekeeping community and really just had a tougher time keeping bees alive in general as time progressed. We also grew, when I started, I had a couple hundred hives, and now we run 13,000 in the summer and 6,000 in the almonds in the winter. And so one of the things that we kind of looked at doing was modifying existing terrain to have a higher nutritional value to the bees. So basically planting pollinator habitat. And we talked a lot about doing this at the bee meetings with different groups. And there really wasn't a lot of resource out there in terms of where do you buy the seed? Where do you get this seed? What seed do I need? What's going to work in my area and how do I plant it? And how do I do this cost effectively? And so that took about 2 years to figure out. We found a program through the FSA called CP42, and the government helped buy the seed and pay for pollinator habitat to be established in what was prior farmland, so where we grew wheat, for example. There were other programs going on. The bee and butterfly habitat gave free seed to farmers and landowners, but they had to be in a certain area where the monarch butterflies travel, and we were not in that area. So we did a couple things. We started a nonprofit, which you can donate to. We use that money to provide seed to any farmer, any landowner that will plant it. And we're working on conceptual packets of information to help people in regions plant habitat successfully. So in doing this, basically we were at the starter phase. So I had to try myself. So we got some seed mix. First thing I did was spent 2 years walking around our farm, which we live on 750 acres in the kind of Blue Mountain region, Walla Walla County, Umatilla County, Oregon. So we walked around, took photos of plants from spring to fall for 2 years. And we said, well, hey, this is the local vegetation that's growing here. Let's see if we can find some seed. We really could not find those seeds. I found some in a seed bank at OSU, actually had some at our extension office in a big freezer, but they had them in small amounts. Each vial was ounces, and I needed thousands of pounds of seed. So kind of back to the drawing board, I looked at what was available cost-wise and what I knew would work with bees. And so we have a lot of vetch around here. We have lupin, alfalfa and clover work well for bees. There are trees that we can plant that work well for trees. So we planted, I think, 120 linden trees, Japanese saphora trees. We've got locust trees that grow here, willow trees, and those work really, really well, which I would say, honestly, in terms of the general public, planting trees is probably the best way to add pollinator habitat to our landscape, because you can do that in an urban environment. I think it produces more nectar per square foot than some of these other plants that we're planting. But we also took 42 different species of flowering plants mixed with grasses, and we drilled them into the ground in 3 different ways. And we just did this 2 years ago here on the farm. And so I think this summer was its first year of coming up. We had minor success, I would say. We learned a lot. Some of the seed hasn't come up yet, but some of it takes 2 years or 3 years to germinate. So it's kind of a watch and wait scenario. And this project will go on, but we did it in different farm plots. So what we're going to probably end up doing in the long run is starting over where it didn't work and utilize the seeding technique on the farmland that it did work. And once we figure that out, then we're going to develop kind of some literature for people and some materials that others can use. But one of the things that I was really critical on is I want to be able to do this cheaply because if you want it to spread, if I want more acres of flowers in the ground, I have to make a solution that works for the majority of current farm or landowners. And so we used old machinery that was left on our farm when we bought it. We have like 1980 IH grain drills that we just modified. We took the tubes off, and so that worked as a spreader. And then we tied a packer to the back of it. We tried different ways of managing the soil. We burned some of the stubble off before we did chem fallow for 2 years on some other ground. And then some ground I just disked up, harrowed, and planted directly, which is the quickest, cheapest way to do it. And so we're just kind of monitoring these different techniques, different seeding rates, and we're going to see what happens. But yeah, that's one of the projects we started for sure.
One of the issues that I've always had a question about would be weed control. And I don't even know that necessarily then a lot of feed plots weeds would be a problem. But when it's invasive weeds, blackberries, Scotch broom, those types of large, really invasive plants, that's been one concern of mine because I don't know, up here in the South Hills of Salem, they'll take over anything and then I just don't know how one. Have you heard any information on that? Certainly burning at first is a great strategy.
Yeah, so that's kind of the double-edged sword, right? I mean, a weed is a weed because we decide it's a weed, but is it a beneficial pollinator plant for insects? There's the other thing I'm learning here is this isn't just for honeybees. There are, I think, 800 native bees to the state of Oregon
That's
alone.
right.
There's evening pollinators. We've got moths, hummingbird moths. We've got all sorts of things that come out in the evening that pollinate. And so it's really kind of cool this journey we're taking. But to the question, for me, when I look at blackberry plants specifically, which is probably one of the plants that produces the best honey in the Northwest, right? It's like that's what we're
Yeah.
known for. One of the problems with it is it's a short-lived bloom. I mean, it's 2 weeks at most,
True.
and it's invasive. It's covering a lot of the land. It is beneficial to birds. I see a lot of birds running, quail and such, running under there and nesting and hiding from hawks. So it has its place definitely. And for me, where I think blackberries have their place is along waterways. Okay, they help with erosion. They build back quickly. They fall down into the water and go downstream. Where we don't want to see those is we don't want to see big swaths of farmland eaten up by those blackberry plants. And in your area,
right.
we see that a lot. When people cut the timber, it fills up with blackberries. And so one of our fields actually had a small patch of blackberry that was, I'd say, like 100 feet by 100 feet. And I mechanically pulled it out the first year. And then when I figured out where the sprouts were, we came back and sprayed them, and we had to spray them multiple times. In that area, inevitably, the seeds I planted after I sprayed are not growing there because the spray persists in the soil, and slows germination. And so blackberries can cause a lot of expense when trying to make a proper balanced pollinator habitat. What I would say in that scenario is if you could, I would just convert that area into grazing pasture for a number of years. So you move the blackberries out, and then you lease the ground to someone with livestock, plant grass. Those livestock tend to keep the blackberries down, or the management of the area, you can keep the blackberries down for a number of years. Regardless of what you do, though, if that is an invasive species in your area, it will eventually come back. And so what you have to do is when you turn the soil into exposed dirt and you're planting your seeds, this is the time where the blackberries and the invasive crops get their opportunity to come out. For us over here, it was a mustard. A mustard just came and covered everything. And vetch was another plant that we actually planted, but it just covers the soil and stops germination from underneath, creates canopy. So these are all tricks, or I would say these are all obstacles to planting a balanced pollinator habitat. I don't have the answers, but I do understand the pain and frustration, and we are working through. But I think it's regionally specific. That's one of the things I'm seeing
Absolutely.
with the seeds specifically, and creating pollinator habitats, very regional specific. So one of the things though that I'd like to take out of this as time goes on is to find plants that apply to broader regions. And so that's one of the things we're going to learn, which plants do well in a broad region, because inevitably what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to grow these plants and harvest their seed in order to create a seed market where people can buy this seed, because that was my biggest issue, was trying to find seed to purchase, because it's just not, pollinator seed is not readily available. You can get alfalfa seed, you can get clover seed, but all these other 40 different plants that I have in our pollinator habitat are just not farmed commercially. And so
Right.
that's an opportunity for future farmers in America to kind of diversify when they're not making monies with their wheat crops, or if they have irrigation pivots. I think there's going to be a market for that in our future, these specialty seeds for sure.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack in what you've discussed here, and I really appreciate it. Things that we've been thinking about a lot. And I do work with specialty seed growers and companies that oftentimes start with just a 10 by 10 plot of something and expand from there. And that's what very possibly needs to happen, is just reintroducing their seeds to a scale that they can now contract, hopefully reasonably for for the beginning of a seed
Yeah, I guess
availability.
some plants are just hard, like especially some of these wild plants, they shatter seed, yields are low. Like there are tricks, and I think Ryan, this, kind of identifying those plants and then kind of zeroing it, when a grower knows the problem and focuses on it, then you can start to get yields increased and more volume and cost comes down. But this seems like the first step is having these kinds of demonstrations, especially by somebody who's not, a researcher or a government agency, kind of laying out what's possible. You kind of know the finances, behind this, and that must be so motivating to people in the community. What kind of conversations have you had with some of the fellow growers in the region?
Yeah, great question. So it boils down to, we live in a capitalistic society, and when you want to get something done, it takes money. And to get people to convert from the way they were doing something to the way you want them to do something, there has to be an incentive there. So that's the bottom line, and you can't get rid of those facts. And so the approach I'm trying to take is with those limitations in mind. And one of the approaches that, as I've been talking about, is very difficult to fiscally make this work. And so starting the nonprofit, getting some money, what I see is that the future world that we build has a lot of issues that we may not see now, but have to be paid for later. I'll give you some examples. We can mine for precious metals, and we can put them into batteries, and we can throw
Yeah.
those batteries into a dump, and we can keep mining for precious metals. But eventually, our dumps are going to become the mines. We're going to remine what we've thrown away. I mean, that's intuitively correct. So with that in mind, why are we throwing these things away and not finding a valid way to recycle, reuse now? And the answer is because it's cheaper to mine them in the existing mines currently. In the future, however, there'll be an opportunity cost to utilizing those dumps. It's the same thing with agriculture and our environment. Right now, there's plenty of space in America where we're expanding out with our cities and our farms, and we're producing economic returns. When certain lands are close to cities and we're only maintaining $100 of profit per acre when we're farming, but we can sell that acre for $250,000 for urban expansion, that's what happens. That's the fiscal incentive. And so we're losing 1 million acres a year of ag, into urban expansion, and we're losing another 1 million acres of prairie land into ag. So it's kind of this transition. One day, though, will run out, and it will start to cost more to do the same things we've done in the past. And if we had a longer term realization of this, if humans, instead of living for 75 years, lived for 1,000 years, this would be a very obvious thing for us to encompass. So what I'm trying to do is look long term. And what can we do long term? Well, we are not going to reconvert existing ag lands or existing urban lands into pollinator habitat. That isn't going to be a reasonable ask. But what we can do is we can expand the value of the acreage that is not used for agriculture and is not used for urban expansion, such as steep zones in our fields. We have hillsides basically that just don't produce the yields. You can have swampy areas in a pasture or in a flat farm that just don't produce. They always flood out. Alkali areas. So I want to concentrate on those. I also want to develop funding via donation to help this go forward. And I think that's kind of what we're doing. So maybe in 50 years, we make quite a bit of money capitalistically farming. Well, what am I going to do with those assets that's really going to help the future? We're going to develop this pollinator habitat, and we have a walking path through here, and it's an education system to bring children in specifically and teach them these concepts, because I think the way into the future isn't by trying to convince the current farmer to change what he's doing. It's to educate the next generation of farmer on what we've learned. And that's important to me, and that's kind of where we're going. And so I'm not sure if I answered the question specifically, but that's kind of our long-term strategy, is via education.
I know that your concept there with targeting the newer generations, I've seen it happen in the past, where the farm has been passed on to the younger folks, and maybe a second time, and there's a vast improvement. Things like pesticide applications and things like that. So I really believe in your idea there. Earlier, you mentioned a nonprofit. Do you want to name your nonprofit here?
Yeah, it's called the Bee Foundation. So our commercial beekeeping operation is Sweet Bee Honey Company. So sweetbeehoneycompany.com. There'll be a link up there that leads over to the donation side of things. We're doing this pollinator habitat. We just, like I said, it's piloted. We've got 60 acres in the ground. We've got the pollinator hike. There's 5 miles of trails that we've built through this habitat. Eventually, there's 450 acres we're converting to pollinator habitat. National Geographic came up for the last couple years and kind of filmed us from start to finish, planting, kind of beekeeping, commercial beekeeping. So that's going to come out in the spring. It's called The Secrets of Bees. And I think we're going to gain traction. I think it's going to be slow, but I think this will be kind of a movement that picks up. And it's kind of my transition from beekeeping. I've been a commercial beekeeper already for almost 30 years of my life. And then I've got kids that are coming up, and I do want them to continue the legacy, but in a new format. I don't see commercial beekeeping, migratory commercial beekeeping, continuing at its current state in 100 years. Maybe even 30 years it's going to change, maybe even 6. You don't really know when the waterfall effect's going to come, but we will have to change the way our food systems operate. And I think when that change occurs will be likely when we lower the cost of energy. So if we develop fission technology that's applicable in the next 50 years, we'll start to move a lot of our ag systems into vertical systems. So instead of using an acre of ground 6 feet tall, we'll use an acre of ground 300 feet tall, multiple floors. Yeah. And we're going to position that near where the food's consumed. And so I think you're going to see a extreme change in the next 2 generations on how our ag systems operate. But with that said, nature still wants to find a balance outside. And so I think keeping that pollinator habitat, understanding kind of the barometer of our environment is very important. And for me, that barometer is the honeybee. And I watch it work, and I see by looking into our glass observation hives that are in our buildings, you can see, oh, something's changed this morning. Look how active they are. And you walk outside and you say, oh, the hawthorn bushes opened up today or whatever. And so it's a very unique way of looking at nature. And we're privileged enough as beekeepers to see this, but many people in society don't have a clue about
Right.
this kind of seeds to pollinators and back. Evolution has been for millions of years, and it's created this cool system that follows the seasons and the blooms and the adaptations of the insects to the flowers, to the length of the stamen and the tongue of the pollinator and the timing that the flower opens. It's all so incredibly complex and beautiful, but we can't save what we don't understand. And so that goes back to my realization is just more education. And I love the bees, don't get me wrong. I love honeybees because I've been in it forever. But there are so many other pollinators out there as well that have
Yes.
just as strong of an impact, maybe not specifically on our food systems, but definitely on our environment and the ecosystem that surrounds us. So it's all super interesting to me. And I think that if you can get people interested in it, that's what creates change.
Especially in that your neck of the woods. I think you are on a part of the state where the bee biodiversity is incredible. Like it is a real remarkable place with lots of nooks and crannies and strange and weird and wonderful bees that I'm sure are starting to make a home in the habitat that you created.
Yeah, we've got all sorts of cool bees. I mean, I've got a poster in the tasting room that has, I think, the 50 different species that we've seen here. We actually have been collecting them. I know it's kind of bad, but we collect them and put them on a pinboard so people can actually see them. And then
Great.
eventually, when they start to do the pollinator walk, we'll have kind of like a resource that they can take with them and see if how many they can identify. And if they can identify 5 or 6, maybe they get a free jar of honey or something, you know? So
That's great.
we're gonna try and find fun ways to get people involved and getting back in touch with the outdoors because since I was a kid, you guys even more so. I mean, the invention of the computer and the internet has just changed the way people interact with their world. And I think it won't be too long. There'll be a Surgeon's General warning about too much technology per day can cause serious
Yes.
Oh, I don't know if
health.
you saw this, but Australia has just banned social media for kids under a certain age. They're going to, it's like, people
Wow.
are recognizing that this is, not having direct, experience with things is, it really stunts you.
Point in case. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, this has been a fascinating conversation. And maybe, I just want to maybe get your final thoughts. Where do you see things in the next 5 or 10 years? I mean, you were talking about the 1,000-year vision, but, looking at, change, we started the conversation talking about changes in almonds and, new pests coming in. How do where do you see things going in the next 5 to 10 years? When you're starting
Yeah.
to think about your retirement and handing things over to your kids.
So the best way to see the future is to think about the past. So in the past 5 or 6 years, what changes have occurred? I can tell you that when the Honeybee Health Coalition started, the goal 10 years ago was to minimize overwintering losses down below 15%. And at the 10-year anniversary, we had a 60% winter mortality rate. So we can see where things are going. I think when the Tropi mite gets here, even back up. Okay, so in the last 3 years, we've had the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, and we've gone from the beekeeping industry has gone from $0 from the federal government to this year over 100 million. Next year, probably 250 million. Keeps going up, and it will keep going up. When the Tropi mite comes, I think we're going to have ripple effects on our economy, estimated between at a high end, at the highest end, once the Tropi mite invades, between 13 and 18 billion dollars a year of agricultural related losses due to that mite. Okay, if we're talking that much money, what could we do for less than that much money that might assist in our long-term goal of providing affordable food to our population? And I think that's the concept is affordable food to our population, sustainable, affordable food. that's healthy. So I think we're going to see indoor facilities go up where you can control environments, you can minimize pests. I think we'll continue to genetically modify plants, but I think there'll be a lot of pushback as we go forward because there are mistakes, unforeseen circumstances that happen when we play with nature. And what I see in terms of our beekeeping industry, I see the beekeeping industry slowly teetering out of commercial pollination. If we do need bees for pollination, I think they'll be grown in industrial warehouses, shipped out, used for pollination, maybe with a queen pheromone, and then they're just gone after 3 weeks, and whatever carton we shipped them in is disposed of or recycled. I can see that being the system that's utilized in the short gap. And I can see commercial beekeepers continuing, but in a way where they're producing honey for a local market. And that's where I think things will go. I think that the price of honey locally will be such that a person can afford to run an operation and produce honey and sell to the public, retail, and make a living. And I see a lot smaller mom and pop stores doing that. But what the transition looks like exactly, I don't know. But I think that that's kind of the direction we're going. When it happens, I would say you're going to see it when the Tropi mites come. So I would think that's going to happen in the next 20 years.
So a transition back to the county-wide, 30 to 60 hive beekeepers selling to their local store and phasing out of large-scale pollination.
Yeah. So Americans eat, 600 million pounds of honey. A lot of that's ingredient honey. It's not table grade. So say that we eat 200 million pounds of honey on the table in a jar. We're only producing now currently 120 million pounds a year, plus or minus. So there's definitely an open market. The question is, why are prices so low? There seems to be this elasticity that exists, but for some reason it's not following the usual economic pathway. And for us, we're dabbling in that, and we sell our honey, I think, $20 a pound. And we don't have any issue with people shopping for price. We have an issue getting it to the consumer fast enough, I think. And it's just, this is my wife's project, but she gets overwhelmed because she's a one person operation right now. We have kids that are growing up, and I think when they get to be working age, they will take off, and I think they're going to generate more revenue in that business than I ever did commercially beekeeping.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, my daughter runs our honey side and sees the same thing. Every year this time we have a Christmas tree farm next door that sells honey, and we're throwing bottles at them as fast as we can. And everybody asked, is this local honey? They say, see those white boxes over there? That's how local it is right there.
I want local honey. Which honey is going to help with my allergies? And so you start with that. I had a stewardess on the Delta flight talk to me, and I said, well, no, number one, you have to buy it where your allergies are. So it needs to be produced off the same plants, basically, that are giving you your allergies. So it needs to be local, it needs to be non-pasteurized and non-filtered. And so she asked, well, what does pasteurized mean? I said, well, it's heated up. When you heat something too hot, you're going to kill enzymes, the yeast. We don't exactly know what your allergy is from. So we want to keep all of those intact. And so she said, well, how can I find local non-pasteurized honey? I said, normally it's a farmer's market. I said, maybe you can find it in a local store. The honey should granulate in the jar. That's a natural process. That's going to tell you that it hasn't been heated too hot, hopefully. And then the filtration process, you're just going to have to read. You're going to have to make a relationship with your local beekeeper. The fact that they're asking me means that there's not a market where they are. And so this is an open market opportunity for beekeepers.
That's right.
And that's why I think it's the next generation. Current beekeepers, farmers, don't want to have a new project, but the next generation, this is the project. Concentrate on retail honey sales. That's what I would say.
Well, fantastic, Ryan. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Your operation sounds incredible, and the far-sighted work that you're doing around creating bee pasture is incredible. I'm really amazed.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.